You're standing in the Forum where Rome celebrates its triumphs. But today, something feels wrong. The crowd isn't cheering for returning generals or conquered territories. They're moving toward the Colosseum with a different kind of hunger in their eyes, and you're swept along with them. Inside, 50,000 voices rise like a wave crashing against stone walls. Below, in the sand-stained dark from yesterday's games, guards are dragging something toward the center. Not an animal, not a gladiator. Something that will make you understand that entertainment in ancient Rome was never just entertainment. It was a machine designed to reshape the human soul, and everyone who watched became part of its mechanism. The roar builds. Whatever happens next, you'll remember it forever. And that's exactly what Rome intended. Before we go deeper, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It genuinely amazes me that stories this dark from 2 millennia ago still reach people across every continent, still make us question what civilization really means. What you're about to witness isn't fiction. It's documented by the poets, historians, and philosophers who sat in those same stone bleachers. 9 types of spectacles so brutal that even the Romans who watched them struggled to justify what they'd seen. And the most disturbing part, these weren't random acts of cruelty. They were scheduled, budgeted, and perfected across 4 centuries by the most advanced civilization the world had ever known. The year is 80 AD. Emperor Titus has just completed the Colosseum after nearly a decade of construction. To inaugurate it, he doesn't throw a celebration. He throws 100 consecutive days of games, 100 mornings of spectators filing into stone seats, 100 afternoons of blood soaking into sand, 100 evenings of bodies being dragged through the gate of death while the crowd places bets on tomorrow's victims. This isn't a festival. This is industrial-scale violence, dressed as civic pride, and it's about to become the defining feature of Roman culture for the next 3 centuries. The first spectacle appears innocent enough from a distance. Venations, they call them hunts, but these aren't hunts in any natural sense. Imagine the arena floor transformed overnight into a miniature forest, complete with transplanted trees. Artificial hills painted to look like mountains. Mechanical waterfalls powered by hidden slaves turning cranks beneath the sand. At dawn, the gates open. Lions from North Africa, bears from Germania, leopards from the Caucasus. Crocodiles hauled from the Nile and kept barely alive during the voyage. Even a giraffe, so alien to Roman eyes that they don't have a word for it and call it a camel leopard, because their language breaks trying to describe what they're seeing. The animals are released together into this manufactured ecosystem, and here's where it turns from spectacle into nightmare. These species would never coexist naturally. The ecosystem is deliberately broken. Lions attack bears, rhinos charge at elephants, deer panic and trample each other trying to escape predators that shouldn't even be on the same continent. The crowd watches 9,000 animals die across those 100 days, but nobody calls it slaughter. They call it entertainment. They call it art. Pliny the Elder sits in the stands taking notes. Years later, he'll write something that should have been a warning. Entire species are vanishing from their native lands because Rome's appetite for exotic death can't be satisfied. The empire is literally hunting animals toward extinction, not for food, not for survival, but because watching a creature die that you've never seen before gives you a thrill that watching a familiar death can't match anymore. But animals, no matter how rare, eventually become predictable. The crowd grows restless by midday. They've seen lions kill. They've seen bears maul. Their capacity for wonder has been exhausted by the third hour, and there are still 9 hours of programming left. Rome needs something that can't be predicted. Rome needs human unpredictability. The second spectacle begins as the sun reaches its peak. Damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. This is when prisoners, criminals, captured enemies, and slaves are brought out. They're not given weapons or armor. They're not trained fighters. They're simply tied to stakes driven into the sand while the same predators from the morning hunts are released again, but this time starved for 2 days to ensure aggression. A man convicted of theft faces wolves that have been trained to attack anything that moves. A woman accused of treason is positioned in front of a leopard that's been goaded with hot irons backstage. The philosopher Seneca attends these midday executions, and what he witnesses breaks something fundamental in his understanding of humanity. He writes later, shaking as he forms the words, "I come home more greedy, more cruel, more inhuman, because I have been among humans." Think about what he's saying. He didn't just watch violence. He watched violence change the spectators. He watched 50,000 people train themselves, execution by execution, to find pleasure in suffering. He watched empathy being systematically eroded from human consciousness, replaced by something darker. And he understood that the real victim wasn't just the person being torn apart in the sand. The real victim was everyone in the audience who cheered, because they were being transformed into something less than human without even realizing it. But midday executions have a rhythm problem. Once you've seen 10 people killed by predators, you've seen them all. The crowd starts eating lunch, talking, losing attention, and Rome cannot afford distraction. Rome needs every spectator riveted, because every spectacle is a lesson in obedience, disguised as entertainment. The third spectacle solves this problem with a twist so dark it takes your breath away. Mythological executions. Prisoners aren't just killed, they're forced to play roles in famous myths, except the endings are rewritten to guarantee death. A man with a beautiful voice is selected and dressed as Orpheus, the legendary musician whose songs could charm even wild beasts. He's placed in the arena with a lyre, surrounded by painted forest scenery. He actually sings. For maybe 3 minutes, he performs for 50,000 people, and his voice is genuinely beautiful. The crowd falls silent, momentarily caught in something that feels like art. Then the gate opens. A bear charges out. In the original myth, beasts stop to listen to Orpheus's music. In Rome's version, the bear tears him apart while he's still holding the lyre. The poet Martial documents it with chilling precision. We saw Orpheus. The ancient legend came to life. But the beast did not obey. The cruelty isn't just the death, it's the perversion of beauty. It's the promise that art can save you, followed immediately by proof that it can't. Rome is rewriting mythology itself to broadcast a message. Nothing transcends our power, not even stories. Another prisoner is dressed as Icarus, given crude wings made of wood and cloth. He's hoisted onto a platform 40 feet above the arena floor. For one moment, suspended in air with those makeshift wings catching the wind, he might actually believe he could fly. Then he's released. He plummets toward the waiting predators below. And Martial writes with dark irony, he must have wished for real feathers. But there's nothing funny about watching a man's last seconds of hope dissolve into terror while 50,000 people laugh. The most grotesque mythological execution involves the story of Pasiphae, the queen who in legend bedded a bull and gave birth to the Minotaur. Rome constructs a mechanical wooden cow, so realistic it almost looks alive. A female prisoner is forced inside. The bull is released. What happens next isn't simulation. It's real violation performed as theater, and the crowd doesn't just watch. They roar approval. This is documented. This happened. The historian Tertullian records it with barely contained rage, trying to make future generations understand that female prisoners were sometimes sexually tortured before execution as part of the official state program. Every myth Rome touches becomes a tool for degradation. Daedalus falling to his death, Hercules crushed by the very strength he represented, Prometheus eaten by vultures, except the vultures are real and the prisoner is genuinely screaming. Rome isn't just killing people, Rome is killing meaning itself, proving that every story, every legend, every symbol of hope can be stripped down and weaponized for cruelty. By now, the crowd has been watching for 6 hours. They're exhausted, they're overstimulated, their moral compass has been spinning so long it's lost magnetic north. And that's when Rome introduces the fourth spectacle, gladiatorial combat, but not the way Hollywood imagines it. These aren't two warriors of equal skill, bound by honor, fighting with dignity. That fantasy is propaganda painted over truth. The reality is engineered imbalance. A seasoned fighter who's survived 50 arena battles faces a criminal who's never held a sword, given wooden practice weapons while his opponent has steel. The outcome is predetermined. The crowd doesn't expect competition. They expect slaughter dressed as sport, and they bet on how long the execution will take. Even matches between trained gladiators are rigged. The Chariot fights with a net and trident, fisherman's tools transplanted into lethal context. His opponent, the secutor, wears a helmet specifically designed to deflect nets. But here's the twist. The helmet narrows vision so severely that the secutor is fighting half-blind. The armor isn't protection, it's punishment. By the 15th minute, both fighters are barely conscious, stumbling under the weight of equipment designed to extend suffering rather than prevent it. Sometimes 50 men fight 50 men, turning the arena into a lake of blood and mangled bodies. The sand absorbs liquid until it can't anymore, and engineers have to rake it between events to keep it from becoming impassable. The smell never leaves. Decades later, people visiting the Colosseum can still detect blood baked into the stone by Mediterranean heat and the sheer volume of death that soaked these walls. But even gladiatorial combat has limits. Fighters might win. Mercy might be granted if the crowd votes for it. There's still an element of unpredictability that makes the spectacle feel less than completely controlled, and Rome demands total control. The fifth spectacle removes all possibility of survival. Sin missione combat. Fights without discharge, without mercy, without the possibility of being spared. Both fighters enter knowing only one will leave alive. The psychological shift is immediate and visible. Desperation changes everything. Fighting becomes feral. The combat strips away any pretense of honor or sport and reveals what it always was. Humans reduced to animal survival instinct, engineered deliberately by a civilization that wants its people to see that transformation and become comfortable with it. The sixth spectacle takes unpredictability to its logical extreme. Naumachia, mock naval battles. Julius Caesar digs an enormous basin near the Tiber River, floods it with water, fills it with actual warships, and loads those ships with prisoners condemned to fight. Not trained sailors, not warriors, just bodies selected for size and strength, handed weapons they don't understand, told to kill each other while the ships sink beneath them. The logistics are insane. Moving that volume of water requires aqueducts built specifically for this purpose. Maintaining ships in freshwater basins requires constant carpentry. The prisoners don't know how to navigate. They don't know how to fight on a rocking deck. Most of them drown before any combat even begins. And the crowd watches for 8 hours as men flail in water, stabbing blindly, screaming for help that will never come, because every person in those ships has been condemned to death before the first sail was raised. Emperor Augustus expands the concept. He creates a basin that stretches 2,000 feet, fills it with 30 warships, and stages a battle between prisoners dressed as Greeks and Persians, reenacting ancient wars for an audience that knows neither side will survive. By the time Emperor Claudius takes power, the technology has advanced far enough that he can drain an entire lake, stage naval battles on its floor, then refill it. The Colosseum itself has channels beneath the arena floor that allow water to be pumped in and drained within hours. The engineering brilliance is undeniable. The moral bankruptcy is complete. The seventh spectacle represents Rome's ultimate innovation in cruelty. Mass choreographed executions disguised as historical reenactments. After Emperor Trajan conquers Dacia, he celebrates by bringing thousands of captives back to Rome. Over 123 consecutive days, they're forced to recreate the battles they lost. Entire formations of prisoners dressed in their native armor, given their actual weapons, positioned on the arena floor while the crowd watches them die in a performance that mimics the war that already destroyed them. The prisoners know the historical outcome. They know they're scripted to lose. They know every man standing beside them is condemned. And they have to fight anyway, performing their own extinction while 50,000 Romans eat and drink and celebrate the inevitability of Rome's dominance. History becomes theater. Defeat becomes entertainment. The message is embedded in the structure of the spectacle itself. Rome always wins. Rome's enemies always fall. Resistance is not just futile. It's already been performed and recorded and celebrated. The eighth spectacle involves something even more psychologically devastating. Executions designed specifically to break the victim's spirit before death arrives. Damnatio memoria, condemnation to memory. Prisoners aren't just killed. They're killed in ways designed to be retold, to spread fear through description alone. One method involves the tunica molesta, the burning tunic. A prisoner is dressed in a shirt soaked in pitch. Fire is applied, but here's the sadistic genius. The shirt is designed so the prisoner can theoretically escape it. They can strip it off. They can run. For maybe 10 seconds, they actually believe they might survive. They stumble across the sand, body engulfed in flames, desperately trying to shed the burning cloth while the crowd watches their animal panic with fascination. Children cheer. Mothers applaud. The prisoner runs toward arena gates that will never open, and the crowd understands perfectly what they're watching. Hope being systematically destroyed in real time. The execution isn't the fire. The execution is the false promise of escape, followed by the guarantee of agony. Other prisoners are dressed as historical traitors and executed using the same methods their historical counterparts endured. A man convicted of treason might be crucified in the exact style that notorious traitors were crucified a century earlier. The execution becomes a history lesson written in fresh blood, teaching every spectator that betraying Rome doesn't just kill you, it erases your individuality and turns you into a prop in an eternal warning system. The ninth, and perhaps most disturbing spectacle, is the one that reveals what all of this was really designed to do: the transformation of the spectators themselves. Because while Rome documented the deaths, while poets recorded the methods, while historians calculated the body counts 400,000 people, across 4 centuries, not counting animals. The real atrocity wasn't happening in the sand. It was happening in the seats. Every execution watched, trained the audience to accept violence as normal. Every mythological perversion taught them that beauty and art couldn't protect anyone from power. Every gladiatorial mismatch demonstrated that fairness was a fiction. Every naval battle proved that Rome could restructure nature itself to serve its will. Every mass reenactment showed that defeat was inevitable and resistance was pointless. And every person who cheered, every citizen who brought their children, every senator who ate lunch while watching humans torn apart, they were being systematically desensitized to suffering. Their capacity for empathy eroded so gradually they never noticed it happening. Seneca saw it. He understood that attending the games changed something fundamental in human consciousness. He watched people become crueler, greedier, less capable of recognizing humanity in others. He understood that the arena was training Roman citizens to accept atrocity as entertainment, which meant they'd accept atrocity as policy, which meant they'd become complicit in systems of violence so vast that no individual could claim innocence. The Christian writer, Tertullian, watched believers die in these spectacles and recognized what the philosophers couldn't quite articulate, that a civilization teaching its people to find pleasure in death had already condemned itself. He called the games seeds of cruelty and predicted that an empire built on training its citizens to cheer suffering would eventually collapse under the weight of its own moral bankruptcy. He was right. By the 5th century, the arenas fell silent. Not because Rome suddenly developed a conscience, but because the empire fragmented. Resources dried up, and the infrastructure of death became too expensive to maintain. The Colosseum stood empty, slowly reclaimed by weeds and weather, its stones eventually scavenged to build churches and palaces. The sand where 400,000 people died was covered, buried, forgotten. The Colosseum still stands, admired for its beauty and engineering, yet beneath every stone lies blood. Each innovation wasn't for glory, but for spectacle designed to perfect suffering, to turn death into entertainment that once held an empire's gaze. The arena isn't an aberration in human history. It's a warning. It's proof that civilization can industrialize cruelty, that entertainment can become indistinguishable from atrocity, that normal people can be trained to accept horror as routine if you just give them comfortable seats and call it culture. Rome didn't fall because barbarians invaded. Rome fell because somewhere between the first execution and the 400,000th, the empire stopped being a civilization worth defending and became a machine that consumed its own humanity for applause. The question carved into those ruins isn't how could they do this? The question is, what are we watching right now that future generations will judge with the same horror? Because the mechanism that built those arenas, the hunger for spectacle, the normalization of cruelty, the training of audiences to accept suffering as entertainment, it never disappeared. It just changed shape, and somewhere, in some form, it's still running.